employee engagement is, all of the data tells us, 70% of an employee's experience is driven by their manager. So we can have a phenomenal company, we can have a phenomenal culture, we can steal from some of our ACE members and have Wiener Wednesdays, but it's really about the manager. And so we have to think about, how do they get what they need, right?
Welcome to the Roots of Success, the premier landscapers podcast that brings you the latest tips and strategies for successful landscape business. I'm Jim Calley, one of the principals and coaches of McFarlin Stanford. Jason New and I started McFarlin Stanford to coach landscape businesses after years in the industry ourselves. Now, more than 10 years since we began, McFarlin has a deep bench of coaches and subject matter experts who work with our clients on very specific issues of business. Whether you're struggling with people, profits, or just day-to-day challenges, our coaches and guests have the real-world experience and practical advice to help you build a thriving and profitable landscape business.
All right. Hello and welcome. Excited to be back with you this week as we are kicking off another Roots of Success roundtable. And so once again, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We are excited to bring you this new content twice a month as we are able to bring our deep bench of experts along the ride to help give you all the information you need to help grow and make your business successful as we are running through what's ahead for the year. And so, Kevin, welcome. This is your, you've been on here before, so this is not your first roundtable. So excited you're here to join us again.
Although this table's square, but.
This table is square, yes.
More of a rectangle actual, but.
So, and then Tracy, this is your first roundtable. So thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So I know, go ahead.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So I know as we are getting started, I guess this is one that I guess comes up a lot in all of our peer groups and all of our coaching and all of our consulting. So I'm very excited to bring along Kevin and Tracy as we enter into this conversation of what communication looks like. And so before I get to our special guest with Tracy, Kevin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and I guess what information you're going to bring for us today?
Yeah, so I was reminded on LinkedIn, I think yesterday, that this is my 3-year anniversary with McFarland.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. I don't know where those 3 years went. They went fast, as I can tell you that. So I've been with McFarlane for 3 years. I come from a corporate background. I worked for a pest management company that we had the pleasure of selling or exiting a year ago this week as well. So this week's kind of a crazy anniversary week. So yeah, I've been with McFarlane and now a full-time facilitator with them and be on the podcast and giving Chris a lot of grief, which is my main core responsibility.
I'm always glad, Kevin, you're here to keep me humble and keep me on my toes, because you certainly do it. So, and thank you for bringing your mustache along this week.
You're welcome. It's a mustache May. I'm making this up. It's going to be a thing. It's going to go viral.
Scary. So, and then as we get started, before I get to Tracy, so we are very excited. So how intentional communication impacts leadership is something that we really wanted to focus on this week. So we're going to be talking a little about operations. We're going to be talking about sales. We're going to be talking about culture. We're going to talk about the peer groups, the engagement that comes through all of these different interaction and how the different tools and self-awareness plays into that. And so, so very excited. Tracy, you are a resident expert when it comes to communication. I know you have a huge background in what leadership development looks like, strengths coaching. So I'd love if you just introduce yourself. For those of us that haven't met you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. I'm Tracy Wallingford. I don't know exactly when my anniversary is, but I go back to 2019 when I spoke at my first ACE Connect and became part of this ecosystem. My first career was actually in advertising, marketing, and communications. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart. And in 2017, I pivoted and went towards people and went and got a master's in management science focused on executive coaching and organizational behavior. And since then, I have been focused on strengths, and that's really the work that I do with this team. I'm an ICF certified coach, I'm a Gallup certified strengths coach, and I really work with our leaders to help them better understand themselves, better understand their teams, so they can communicate better, get more done, achieve more, and frankly have more fun while doing it.
Yeah. And so I think the most exciting part about that for me, Kevin, is you bring a bug background, I bring a plant background, you actually bring the skills of how we actually put this all together, and we translate this into language that people can understand. And so so I think what we're looking for today, what we really want to see you take away from this is a lot of tools, a lot of tips, a lot of things you can be doing internally in your organizations, with your teams, with your managers, as you're moving through your day-to-day operations. And so as you're listening today, I know we're going to bring a lot of experience, a lot of lessons learned, maybe some funny examples along the way of kind of how we can do that and how we've been able to work with teams over the course of time. And so I'm just going to start it up. Let's open up with one simple question. What's one communication issue that you see most often in a growing company? So Kevin, we'll start with you.
Lack of meetings or cadences for the organization to interact with each other, right? Like a lot of water cooler talk where you catch each other in the hallway or around the office or in the yard, but not a recurring, structured, consistent place for communication to occur.
Yep. How about you, Tracy?
Great point. I would say that most people think they're great communicators.
Yeah.
That the number one problem is that people don't realize that what they say is not always what others hear or read or whatever that structure for communication is, which I know we're going to talk more about it today, but it's truly a self-awareness problem.
Yeah, and I'll speak for myself. I mean, I feel like we have a lot of meetings, we do a lot of stuff, but then what comes of those meetings? Like, where do we take the next step? How are we walking away with some form of communication that people will actually take something and do something with that, which is quite often the challenge I feel like I run into a lot when I'm coaching individuals and working with people. So when we talk about the breakdown of why communication will break down in a growing company, Tracy, when you've been working with organizations, where do you most often see that breakdown occur?
Well, I think to go back to what Kevin said about they don't have structure and cadence, often I see it break down when it's choosing how to communicate what, when, right? So we have so many communication channels today. I was just having this conversation with someone that said, way back when we talked to each other face to face, and I think we're going to get to that a little bit today, that small companies, when you actually see each other, that's a really effective form of communication. I can look at you, I can read your body language, I can understand your intention. But as you move away from that to email and to Slack in some environments and to suddenly text messages, a lot of that context is lost. So it's a real challenge to think about what are you communicating when? What's appropriate to actually pick up the phone if your employees are actually old enough to know what a iPhone is used for. Right? I mean, I literally have people that I work with, young people who don't ever use it for a telephone. It's a text. It might be an IM through Instagram or something like that, but it's thinking about how do we really consider what we communicate when, what can wait till you're standing one-on-one, what's appropriate for a stand-up meeting. It's probably not a long, detailed explanation. So you all, from an operations perspective, it can help me think about that, is how do you choose the right vehicle? And then how do you make sure what you're communicating is actually heard and received effectively and the way it was intended?
Yeah, that really makes me think, so Kevin, your background, you've worked for, Fortune 500 companies with some large chemical companies. You've also worked for small mom and pop operations, in small operations with very few individuals. How has that complexity changed as you've gone from these large organizations to small organizations to mid-sized organizations? What does that look like?
Well, I think there's two elements to it. I think one of them is, I think that the rapid speed of which technology has changed, even in my career, which, we were laughing at the beginning of this of how much of our gray hair is going to show in these lights, and it's probably a lot.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah. It's mainly me I'm talking about. So even in my, what I would love to think is a short professional career, the technology has been, it's crazy what the adoption has been in pre-COVID and post-COVID, and how all of a sudden, like if you weren't a remote-oriented company, all of a sudden you became a remote-oriented company, and that probably took what was a normal cadence and communication process through whatever platform, if there was platforms, was thrown completely out the door and completely redone. So I think the short answer is, I think part of it is as technology has evolved and became
I'll say you're probably not too far off.
has become worse.
Don't talk to me, Kevin. Just send me a text.
I think that is a piece of it. I also think that the size and scale comes into it, and so I think the biggest thing to remember, like I remember from like big corporations, we were pretty good at buying technology. Mm-hmm. We were horrible at implementing it. Which, I mean, by the way, that doesn't matter how big of a company you are. That's just a struggle in general.
I hear that all the time.
It was actually my little division of this big, huge beast that sat down and created a document that said, this is when you email. This is when you Microsoft Teams. This is when you pick up the phone. And this is when you send a text message. And it was because we were really struggling with that, right? So our little business unit had kind of gone rogue and implemented Slack. And then all of a sudden we were, moving more into a Microsoft ecosystem as a company. And we're like, here's Teams. And all of us like, okay, great. I'm losing Zoom and Slack. Like, I'm quitting. Like, everyone starts to panic, right? And then we took that moment to say, you know what? We've never even in the old ecosystem defined what communication and when you should use it. And we did that. And it worked well. For a large company, but it took, one could argue, we were a $150 million business out of, a multi-billion-dollar corporation that took us saying, we struggle with this, like maybe we should put effort into this.
Yeah.
But
and define it.
I think the point you bring up applies across businesses,
Correct.
right? And it's also recognizing when you need a change. You mentioned sort of smaller businesses. I remember when I was in the startup world in technology, that when we moved from one floor to 2 floors, and think about our landscapers, right, who have people out in the field, people who, I work with Greenery, who has multiple branches. When you move from not being able to see someone, and again, read that context, to necessarily having to communicate in a different way, whether that's written, now we get lots of talk to text, and you can imagine what might happen there. Really, you lose some of that context, and you have to recognize when it's time to actually put together that, which sounds like nirvana to me, that you actually wrote down.
I can send it to you.
Can you send it to me?
Yeah.
Great.
Everyone else, you can email me. I'll send it to you.
But I think it's really important, and it also helps with really thinking through what needs to be tracked for a greater audience. Again, as we grow and as we have multiple branches, if what's happening in this branch only stays in this branch, are we actually sharing the knowledge and our best practices with other branches? Well, if it's just a text between 2 people, then how are we creating institutional knowledge within our companies?
Yeah, I mean, really hearing both of you say that, I mean, what I'm hearing is there's an evolution that's happening, as you're growing your organizations. The struggles that you ran into when you were a 5-person operation, and I'm the guy that's selling the work, doing the work, and showing up on site to perform the work, maybe with 2 or 3 other people, looks vastly different once I've got 3 crews, 6 crews, 8 crews. I talked to a guy this morning who has 12 crews and wishes he had 18 crews, and as that evolves, communication has to evolve, right? And so as you're talking about it, those systems become absolutely critical to success as you scale, and so as you're scaling, those systems, and Kevin, I know you work a lot on the technology side with what systems look like, how have you seen some of these systems? Like when you have that tree of decision making, you mentioned Teams, you mentioned some of those things. What are some different systems you've used in the past?
Well, I think the first thing you should start with is like, what are you already paying for? Let's like not overcomplicate this. And most often this decision is kind of forced upon you, right? So like I step out of my corporate career and go back to when, I was the president of a pest control company. Our decision was forced by the fact that we did not provide a mobile phone to our technicians who were in the field. So our field laborers, right? So what that then meant was we had a group chat of 21 people in a text message chain. Now, when I offboard an employee, which I was pretty good at one point because we needed to be, because we were evolving, right? Now I've got this guy and his personal phone number, and we got to go create a whole nother text message chain. And then what if someone selects the wrong text message chain? And like it was like chaotic. Or we had some employees who left on good terms, but then they were still bothering the company, and I'm like, nobody reply to him, like stay focused on your job type thing, right? the decision was forced for us in that situation, right? I was like, this is not sustainable. It has been good. And if you think back just a couple of years ago, Apple wouldn't even allow you to have more than 10 people in a group chat or group text. So the technology will probably force you to make that decision. In our case, I'm not the biggest fan of Microsoft Teams, but I'm already paying Microsoft 365 license at that time for Innovative. By the way, this is the same advice I had given to McFarlin. I'm like, hey, we're paying for this. It's already part of our licensing. Like, why would we go add it on, right? I love Slack. Slack is great, but Slack costs more money and is outside of that system. So I think the short answer would be is like, look at things that already exist, right? Like I know of a couple of landscapers who use Bamboo HR for their HR software, and there's a messaging piece that exists inside of that. So they were already utilizing that. They just, utilized it as part of it. And I think you kind of have to ask yourself, will this work today? And will this work in a couple of years at whatever scale or compounded growth rate that your organization is seeing, to make sure that you're not, implementing, rolling out, and dealing with change across your organization for something that's going to have to change again in a couple of months or a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I think I like the order we talked about this, because I think clarity about what gets communicated where is really foundational.
Yeah.
Then how do you actually do it? Because what you don't want is someone trying to get performance feedback, for example, via text, and certainly not via group text to 21 people, right?
Right.
Praise in public and, give constructive feedback in private. So I think all of this is about sort of knowing how, and then I think where I tend to get involved is not just how do we actually do it functionally, but what's the right communication style for your team?
Yeah. And I'm thinking through like the sales side and the operation side, like how do I make these two connect from a communication standpoint? I know me personally, I've started to use a recording. Like I'll record my conversations, I'll record my handoffs, I'll record, what it is I'm trying to say to a production team. Not just the sake of being able to say, I gotcha, I told you that, but more importantly, like there's things maybe I did forget. Maybe there is something that I want to make sure this person has a recap of what we were talking about, or maybe something we looked at on site, and I can send them those follow-ups, no different than my conversations today. I take conversations, I record my notes, I have follow-up on my notes, and it's amazing when I go back and look at those, man, it's a refresher for me as well. Like, man, I probably could be better at communicating. Like I couldn't make heads or tails of my own transcript on that. Like no chance this person got those details. So understanding how technology can play into that and the method of communication and kind of how we script this is super important. Tracy, I'd love for you to share a little bit, one-on-ones are something very important to what we teach at McFarlin Stanford. It's something that we believe in. We understand, how many one-on-ones a person should be able to have, what should be covered in a one-on-one. Talk to us a little bit about I'd love a couple perspectives. One, if I'm a manager managing a one-on-one, how I should be approaching that conversation. And number two, if I am coming to that one-on-one maybe I'm a project manager or superintendent and the director of construction is my manager. I'd love some context from you of as each one of those seats, how should I look at that? How should I approach that conversation?
Well, I think as you said, you should, what is it Jim says, the only time you can skip a one-on-one is if you're dead, right?
Yeah.
So we do find them to be very important. And one of the things I like to think about is sort of, do you have a strategy and a plan for your one-on-ones? So are they, I don't like to treat our one-on-ones as a project update. Right? Mm-hmm. Is that really the best? I think we have other opportunities. We have daily stand-ups. We have other kinds of meetings that are truly a project update. I like to see a one-on-one as driven by the team member versus the manager. I love a shared document or a shared agenda beforehand, and I like the team member to really drive the agenda. And I think of it as an opportunity for them to come to their manager, right, with what is it they need? Are there obstacles in their way? Do they need some kind of support, right? If you think about employee engagement, the foundation of employee engagement is I have the tools and, I know what's expected of me at work is foundational, and I have the tools and resources I need to do my job. And to me, the one-on-one is a phenomenal opportunity for that employee to come to their manager. And remember, employee engagement is, all of the data tells us, 70% of an employee's experience is driven by their manager. So we can have a phenomenal company, we can have a phenomenal culture, we can steal from some of our ACE members and have Wiener Wednesdays, but it's really about the manager. And so we have to think about, how do they get what they need, right? I'm clear on what's expected of me, and I have the tools and resources I need to do my job. And if not, I feel like that one-on-one needs to be the place for them to be able to get the support, right? Challenge, support, and reward that they need to be successful.
So I was just jotting down a question because this one comes up a lot. Tracy, I talk to this person every day. Why do I need to have a one-on-one? I see them every day. I talk to them every day. How would you respond to that person?
I'm glad you see them every day is the first thing I would say, because frankly, in our distributed world and when we have teams and crews out on the thing, if you actually see them every day, that's a win. But this is dedicated time for them to bring to you what they need. It's also dedicated time, I feel like, to think about, and again, that's why I like kind of think of it over a year in a strategy. You know, are we having monthly discussions? Are we having quarterly discussion? What are their goals? What is it how do they want to grow with us? We love a good career ladder. Are we actually giving them the opportunity to get feedback from us in a way that's effective for them? So yes, you talk to them every day. That I'm thrilled with that. But this is their time to actually get information from you versus your time to direct them. I think there's other opportunities to do that. Now, clearly, it's also an opportunity for one-on-one, closed-door feedback if it needs to be given. Praise in public and give our constructive feedback in private.
I hope everybody just heard what Tracy just said right there. Like, she's talking about things that go beyond just, hey, you showed up to work and the crews are out the door, right? Like, we're not talking about the little simple conversations. We're talking about the things that are next level that you kind of shared. Like, where's your career going? How are we growing? How are we developing you as a team member? What is it that you are trying to get to that may be the next stage of your career, or maybe the next quarter of your calendar year, right?
It's strategic versus, tactical, which is like, so like the example you gave of, I talk to him every day. Well, that's great that someone, in the hallway told you that, that crew unloaded, broken equipment and didn't label it appropriately, and now we don't know, and now we're ready in the morning. That's all tactical things. Or another way you could maybe look at this is it's reactive versus proactive. The conversations that happen in your one-on-one are hopefully a proactive, strategic way to help that employee in their career or in their role, unlike the conversations that happen around the hallway where it's like,
Well,
we're not ready. And
the truth is, as you know from the monkey, right? Don't take that monkey in the hallway. That when they grab you in the hallway to ask you that question, as a leader, I want you to determine, should you answer that question? Or should you give them the opportunity to bring you a solution? And that one-on-one's a phenomenal opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
What do you think? What have you tried? What would you do next? Great, let's talk about it in our one-on-one. Again, is it urgent or important, or both? And then determine, should I have that conversation in the hallway? Because again, if it's in the hallway, it's likely not documented anywhere. And I think that's another communication opportunity we have. I love, Chris, what you said about, I like to send recaps. I like to have the team member actually send the recap, or at minimum, give me the recap while we're sitting here. Here's what I think I communicated. What did you hear? What did you take away? Because even in the same room, at the same rectangular table we're sitting at, we could really take away completely different things from this conversation.
Yep. Yeah, and I think, I love what you said. You kind of dropped a little tidbit in there, which is come prepared with solutions. That is such a critical piece of like, hey, if I'm getting questions all day, maybe I'm answering too many questions. Maybe I'm being the guy that has all the answers versus empowering my team to go out there and find the solution, create the solution. I may not love every solution they come up with, but hey, if I'm encouraging them to think through it and solve it, I'm making them better. And it may not feel like you're solving the problem right then, but you are making that individual better.
That's absolutely right. And frankly, the team members we want, right, are those who want to grow, right? If they have the will to grow, we want them to grow, to really grow those skills to be better. And if they have the skills, right, if we don't let them use them, they're going to lose their will.
Yeah.
So maybe just to give to maybe pull it back to the landscapers who are listening to this, conversation. Start small, and what I mean by that is I hear over and over again about like weekly one-on-ones. Mm-hmm. That seems like a lofty goal for someone who's never done them before, or maybe they're inconsistently doing them. I would rather you hear that you're doing a quarterly one-on-one every quarter, come hell or high water, unless they're dead, right? I'd rather hear that than to hear that you are scheduling weekly meetings and missing 3 of the 4 weeks in a month, right? I'd much rather would hear that, right? Especially like the cultural impact that has on that individual employee. So I think start small, start tactical. I want to reiterate what Tracy mentioned about like have the employee provide the agenda. There's a phrase I heard, I believe it was actually at an Ignite conference for Field Routes and Aspire a couple years ago. She's the CEO of AG1, and she talked about how during her corporate training days at Hooters, great talk, by the way, is very fascinating. They use this tool called MMDD, what makes my day difficult. Okay. And that was just a little tool that they use to like have that employee capture those things to bring into their one-on-one to try to like on the grassroots level find the little things that could be tweaked to make things better. So
yeah. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. I'd like to talk a little bit about the customer experience. So oftentimes when communication is lacking, details are lacking, and there's misalignment in what and how we're communicating. What and how does the customer experience suffer from this? How is that the impacted result, that I guess the unintended result?
Well, let's start with Kevin, because he literally comes from being president of a pest control company and probably took those calls from those customers.
Yep.
Kevin, I paid you for rat control, and I've got a rat problem.
Well, first of all, Chris, you didn't pay anybody because he keeps asking me for these. I'm like, Chris, my job was to make money, not to solve rodent issues. I think the way that you guys were talking about one-on-ones, I mean, communication is communication, right? Whether it's client-facing or whether it's internal, what people hear and what is said is very different. And in our world, service agreements or contracts are very scary to a lot of people, even in the landscape industry, right? But what they do is they very clearly define what I'm going to do and what you are going to do. And that's like the baseline, right? So like we would always start by saying like, we'll email over our service agreement. I want you to read it over. You're going to initial and sign it back, or sign it and send it back. And they'd be like, why do you have a service agreement? The last company I talked to was, I'm like, and it was so day one during our sales process, we were identifying to them, it very clearly outlines what we're going to do, what you're going to do, and where we fall apart in our communication, what the process is. We also live in a world of telephone. Tracy may be a certified, CliftonStrengths person. Neither of us, none of the 3 of us, are marriage. We're not counselors, and most often you're interacting with one member of that family. When we've sold something, when we're servicing something, or doing the construction project, or doing the maintenance, and so often we're caught in this game of telephone, right, where we are talking to one of the spouses, the other one is not involved. And then we're relying on the first one to clearly communicate to the second one what we did and didn't do, or what we're not going to do, or what we are going to do, right?
Yeah.
And so, again, that's where that recorded conversation, easily shared, or the outcome of that conversation using AI tools or whatever it may be, it just increases the likelihood of what we said we're going to do and what holds us accountable, which is what Chris was trying to talk about earlier, right? About recording even personally, we're held accountable. It just helps make sure that, our T's are crossed and our I's are dotted, and hopefully we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
And I think I'll take it past the contract. And now I understand why often someone will say, can we have both you and your husband there when we come to pitch you, insert here, expensive home service. So I thank you. I now get that. Feeds my learner. But I'll take it from then, right? Because you've got here's what we agree to, and I love that in writing, right? I mean, super clear, we all get it. There's also think about communication styles, right? And of course, I'm going to bring strengths into this. Now, in a customer situation, we don't always know their strengths unless you're me and ask people if they've taken the assessment and what their top 5 are. But you can actually get some clues, right, into what their strengths might be, what they bring to the table, what they're looking for from you. So a relationship builder is not going to go to the T's and C's of the contract
Right.
until you've maybe connected with them about how's your day, how's your family, why is this service important to you, right? You're looking to build, we're going to do a new hardscape and re-landscape your backyard. What do you want to do with that, right? A relationship builder wants to tell you about their family and their daughter's graduation party they want to throw. And you're not going to get anywhere in that conversation until you've made some connection. That's great and really intuitive to you if you are a relationship builder.
Yeah.
If you are an executor who is looking to check this off, get this signed, get on to the next call, and you don't take that step, you may not close that deal,
Yep.
right? That person isn't, you can tell them all the things that you want to communicate.
Right.
But if you're not taking into account what they need from you, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah. All right, I've got a question here. How do I know if I have a communication problem? So we'll end on Tracy on this, but so Kevin, let's start with you. How do we know if we have a communication problem? what is the red flags that come out?
Well, I mean, the easiest is frustration, right? I mean, like whether it's external or internal, either way, I mean, if people are frustrated, then that is your number one indicator that
Yep.
you're not communicating. And oftentimes you're going to feel it more, right? You're like, okay, I'm not on the same page. Something isn't, like, even you've got the internal, the wherewithal to know, like, this is not, I don't feel like I'm understanding, or I'm lost, or whatever it may be. So I think frustration is the easiest part. I mean, if you want to use like true, like other measurable KPIs, it's your callbacks, it's your complaints, it's your, if you want to look at an external, like a customer interaction, right? And then, the classic sales to production handoff conversation, which, is always there, right? That's a very quick and easy pinch point, a natural bottleneck within an organization that tends to show itself pretty quickly, right? Especially as you grow as an organization, right? Because in the past, you're the owner, you're the salesperson, just because you're an entrepreneur, you typically are that, right? And then you're probably involved in operations. In fact, you probably are the salesperson and the production guy, and it's really easy for nothing to get lost in between the two.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden that's changed, right? So I think maybe to answer in maybe a proactive way, when a role is created and then something is added to your company, maybe you added an account manager as an example that you didn't have before, that's probably a good time to proactively think, okay, where are we going to fall apart in communication? Internally,
Yeah.
externally, right? I mean, like, you're changing. The ecosystem has changed, to use Tracy's word earlier. Maybe it's the humans we're talking about there, right? But I mean, like, it's a game of telephone. So you'll know, right? So new people and expansion and change is all areas where you'll feel it.
Yeah. All right, so Tracy, I'm going to frame this up a little bit different for you, because you've had the advantage of not only getting to walk into small businesses, you've walked into some very, very large corporations and been able to see executives all the way down to entry-level managers navigate these problems. So you get to see it from a little bit different lens, I think, than what Kevin and I have over the course of our careers. But like, so what are those warning signs? What are those things that when you walk in, you're like, the alarm bells are going off. We've got a communication issue here. It's all hands on deck if we're going to be able to figure this out. So what are you seeing? What are you looking at when you're in those situations?
So I think what generally gets me called, right, is that someone is not meeting expectations, right? That something isn't getting done, or something isn't getting done in line with what they think their culture, or how they define their culture, right? So whether that's in a big company actually doing an employee engagement survey. And I pulled the latest stats for you. One of the reasons we love Gallup and we love CliftonStrengths is actually the research behind it, because it's backed by Gallup, the research organization. So global employee engagement dropped to 20% in 2025, the lowest level since 2020, of course, during the pandemic, and the second consecutive year of decline. So think about that. Engaged employees is running about 20%. So how do you actually know that, right? How do you know if are they achieving their goals? Are they happy, right? I mean, that's a really terrifying
pretty
number.
Terrifying number.
So
basically, people are coming to work, they just don't talk to each other.
They don't talk to each other. We've, the concept of quiet quitting, right? We've heard about that in the last few years.
They need a Milo's down the street is what they need.
Right?
Happy hour.
Happy hour, yes. So think about that, right? That literally engagement, but engagement doesn't read in the moment. If we are remote, and of course more and more of our large corporations are calling people back to the office. So our landscapers, for the most part, literally have had the luxury of actually being in person all this time. But we still aren't with our crews all day. We aren't with our teams all day. Do we actually know how engaged they are? Do we see and hear and feel that sort of commitment to the company and the cultural values? And when I go into organizations, what generally it starts with is people are quitting, someone's getting things done, but we're getting a description that he or she is toxic, right? That they're successful in that maybe they're selling, but people don't like working with them. So they come around, and especially for our business owners, right? We often hear about the elephant in the room. There's someone, right? One of these things is not like the other. There's someone who just doesn't fit in, perhaps to where we are now. Great team member when we were 5, perhaps not as effective when we're 50. So it's generally frustration, which is exactly what you started with. And it starts with that feeling in your gut, right? I'm sitting down to talk to someone, and I'm just feeling frustrated.
Yeah.
And then how does that show up in actually our business results, whether it's our churn from our customers or, frankly, our churn from our employees?
Yeah. All right. So as we've kind of framed up some of the challenges we've had, Tracy, you kind of mentioned it just a second ago when we talked about the CliftonStrengths. And so I'd love to dive into the CliftonStrengths a little bit, because your background, your experience, your knowledge, you have spent a tremendous amount of time, effort, and energy to learning and becoming an expert at this. And now what you've been able to do on behalf of McFarlin Stanford with our clients in this has been absolutely phenomenal. We're seeing tremendous results out of this. So I'd love if you first could share a little bit of what is the CliftonStrengths philosophy? Tell us a little bit about what this is, what it means, and kind of how does this match with what we're trying to solve today?
So if you think about the CliftonStrengths philosophy, it's really that we should all lean into what we're good at. So it really comes from, why do we focus on what's wrong with people rather than what's on right with people? So the way I often describe it is, look, if we have 10 of something to invest, so 10 hours, 10,000 hours, if you're a Malcolm Gladwell fan to be an expert, right? $10, $10,000, $100,000 if you're paying for college, right? If I have 10 to invest on my scale of 0 to 100, do I want to invest it where I'm a 0 to get to a 10, or a 10 to get to a 20? Or frankly, even a 50 to get to a 60, right? Trying to squeak by with some passing grade. Or do I want to invest it where I'm an 80 to get to a 90, or a 90 to get to a 100? And that's really what the strengths philosophy is about. The assessment measures the way we naturally think, feel, and behave, right? And helps us figure out how to lean in to those talents and strengths. And one of the beauties of it is we don't have to be well-rounded as an individual, right? Those of us that grew up in a certain era, you have to be well-rounded. And no, this is all about, I just read, I have a rising senior in high school, so leaning into the college thing that they want people to be pointy, right? Instead of being well-rounded, we want you to be pointy. What are you good at? What are you going to uniquely bring? And that's the strengths philosophy. Now, how that applies to communication has really created some aha moments, I think, within our own team at McFarlin Stanford, as well as in our customer teams. And I think, we spent a couple of years with Coastal Greenery and had some big aha moments. But the concept is the ways we naturally think, feel, and behave, actually, behavior ties directly to communication. And the way we communicate is from our own unique lens on the world.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'd love to, because you mentioned Coastal Greenery. I know y'all just got back. You were out there, and you've been working with them for quite some time. And so just for context for everybody that's listening to us today, so Coastal Greenery's Jeffrey Johns, longtime ACE member of the peer group program, probably almost going on 20 years, I think. It's been a long time. He and Misty have been really grinding it out, working out there, long enough that the boys are now involved in it.
Yes, absolutely.
And involved in a big way,
positions.
because Kevin, you're facilitating for one of the sons.
Yep.
And I get the opportunity to do that with you. I've also gotten to facilitate with Jeffrey John. So I've got the unique lens of getting to have seen both in that leadership position as they're now moving this business to the next level. And they're moving it in a very big way. Like, this business has grown tremendously over the course of our journey with them. So it's been very exciting to see. And so as you've seen that, I'd love if you could share when you first got to Coastal Greenery and you had the opportunity to start working with their team, you took them through a lot of really great exercises. And so we're throwing names and logos and colors and a lot of great stuff, but I'd love if you could talk a little bit about, what was the challenge? What was the thing he saw that he said, man, I need to take a look at this, one. And then two, how were you able to go in there? Because we have seen such a leap in what that looks like at their organization. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about that journey of, what did we go through with them? Because I think that's important for everybody that's listening today. You guys have talked one-on-ones, you guys have talked communication, you talked about the failures that come through communication. What do I do? How can I solve this? This is one of those tools that will help you solve that. Talk to us a little about what that looks like.
Well, I think the important thing to recognize is that Jeffrey and Misty have built an incredible company based on an incredible roots culture. So they were doing lots of things right. So this was not a remedial, right? Sometimes I get called for an intervention, right? That, frustration, that pit in the stomach. In this case, Jeffrey got to experience, you said we weren't marriage therapists, but in fact we do CliftonStrengths for couples when we take our teams to Italy. And Jeffrey and Misty got to experience with Megan Parker, my partner in crime, who is also a Gallup certified strengths coach. We do sort of a powerful partnership session where we really dig into what do you bring to the table, and then what does your spouse, partner, sometimes sons and daughters that come on our Italy trip with us, what do they bring? And what's the power of that? Do you lead with different lenses on the world, which frankly most of our spouses do, or are you the same people, which is my husband and I are?
Yeah, y'all are unique.
We are unique.
My wife and I are opposites.
Exactly,
Yeah.
which is most of what we see. So he got to experience that. Wow. Understanding that unique lens that we both bring, and as I often say it in classes, the other person is not trying to drive you crazy. They just see the world from their own lens, and it's completely different than yours, right? And that's really what he learned from this. And he realized that as Coastal Greenery, who'd built a multi-million-dollar amazing business, but really saw the opportunity they just added a third branch to get to the next level. And he sees going to 40 million. And I love Jeffrey. He's like, if I'd done strengths earlier, I'd already be at a $40 million company. And they are well on their way. He saw there was real power in investing in understanding each other better, understanding how to connect people's strengths to the right seat on the bus, as Marty always says, to quote Marty, how do we get people in the right seats on the bus so they can bring their unique talents and strengths individually to create a better and more effective collective. And that's really what we came in to do. So we started with the assessment. What are your, what are the ways you think, feel, and behave? And then we always talk about how talent times investment equals strengths. What are you investing in to create these strengths?
Yeah. Well, it's been incredible to see the journey they've been on. It's been incredible to see just how far they've come. And now, Kevin and I getting to see, the boys starting to work on another level, Drake and the team starting to work on another level. Just what's ahead, like, oh my gosh, the opportunity is endless. And so it's exciting to see that journey of how we've been able to help jump in, help them get some answers, tactically move through it.
Absolutely.
And now doing something with it.
Right. Well, it starts with that self-awareness, and then really they apply it every day.
So before we get to takeaways, I'd love to grab a couple takeaways from each one of y'all as we kind of wrap up. I'd first like to say thank you all for joining us. I know we've got some great things we want to make sure we wrap up with here in a second, but just a reminder, our Roots of Success podcast, we put out 2 of these every single month. We like, follow, subscribe. This helps us not only bring better content for you, but it also helps us do the things we need to do to help elevate the experience, so that we're making sure that we're continually bringing good insight, good information, not only from our peer group programs, from the landscape professionals that we have the opportunity to kind of move and travel and work with all across the country. And so I want to say thank you, Kevin, for joining us, and you, Tracy, as well. So as we move to takeaways, Kevin, I'd love if you could share, we've had a great conversation here today. What are a couple things that really come to mind, stood out to you as we kind of wrap up our time together?
I think the biggest thing I want people to take away from this is and we touched on it a little bit, we probably should have spent more time on it, but your meeting, the meeting structure that you have, how many, who are they, who's in it, don't have meetings to have meetings. We all know that. So there's 3 main things I want everyone to take away from this from a meeting perspective, right? I want them to, there needs to be an owner of every meeting, and there needs to be an agenda of every meeting. I do not mean in that case an agenda that is given or sent out 15 minutes before. I don't mean that. I mean an agenda that everyone knows what we're going to do in that meeting every time, so that we prevent pontificating, or we don't have that strategic thinker who, if you need to send stuff out in advance, do it in advance, and you can take the CliftonStrengths in, but then you're advancing that conversation in that room and what's getting done. So that's why you have to have an owner who gets it done. So an owner, an agenda, and come hell or high water, just schedule them out for the whole year and don't miss them.
I love that. And I think end with takeaways, so you can actually be sure that all those people with all their unique lenses actually took away this.
Yeah, so that's maybe the execution of, what we talked about with the CliftonStrengths piece of it. So, I mean, I thought about that a lot as Tracy was talking about how important all of what she was talking about and how people interact or how they perceive information in their lens of the world or how they share it. That meeting and that agenda, it matters. And that to me is like, it's my takeaway. It just reinforces as I have these conversations with our ACE peer group members or other people that we interact with across the industry. It's just important. It's just important that you execute a good round meeting cadence with an agenda.
Yeah, I see you do this on a regular basis. So, I mean, you do a phenomenal job with it. So, Tracy, how about you?
I think my takeaway is around do something differently, right? Understand how you prefer to communicate. Understand that may not work for everyone else. If you have strengths or you want to do strengths, I can give you some clues, but you can also ask the question, right? If something isn't jiving, ask the question, how do you prefer communication? How do you prefer feedback, which we didn't dig into here, but another key question, right? Because we all have our lens we receive, give and receive feedback through, but really do something differently. Do something with that information, right? Think about how you approach the world. Think about how your team members approach the world, and then actually do something differently based on that knowledge.
Approach the style. So, yeah, and I think for me, I think part of it comes from a little bit of what both of you said, which is, what tools do I have? How am I using tools to make me a better communicator? How am I tracking my information, tracking my meetings, tracking my conversations? What is my form of note taking? What is my form of coming prepared? So I'm not just winging these meetings, but coming with good, insightful context to these conversations that I can grow and we can do something with, right? So using those tools to help simplify what that looks like. Thank you for joining us for another Roots of Success member roundtable. We're excited to always bring these to you. We're excited to bring you more as we continue to move through the year and through our time together.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Roots of Success, brought to you by the subject matter experts at McFarlin Stanford. Have a question you want our coaches to tackle in a future episode? You could submit that at mcfarlinstanford.com/podcast. And to find more helpful content from McFarlin Stanford, follow us on X, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. If this or any of our episodes have piqued your interest in ACE peer groups, we encourage you to join us at ACE Discovery. just check out the events tab at McFarlinStanford.com. This is Jason New, co-founder and principal at McFarlin Stanford. We'll see you next time.